Dr. Catherine Clinton. I guess I should first clarify. Do you prefer Catherine or Dr. Clinton? Do you have a preference?
Catherine's perfect. Yeah.
We had money on that.
I know. I was like, every doctor that I've gotten along with prefers their first name.
Yeah.
No, but you did work hard for that title, so I get it. We're excited to have you on and talk about all things quantum biology. I would love if you could first just kind of introduce yourself, who you are, where you are in the world, what you do, and how you got there.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Thank you for having me on. I'm excited to talk about one of our favorite subjects.
Yes.
This is going to be fun. I am a licensed naturopathic physician here in Oregon in the Pacific Northwest. And I got my start in quantum biology when I was looking for better ways to heal. I was in my second year of naturopathic medical school, and it was that initiation year where they tried to weed people out, right? Really long hours, long clinic hours, very strict attendance. If you're not there at 7 a.m., then it doesn't count type of which I'm not the best at. So
Sounds
it
like
was
somebody else I know.
I would have thought naturopathic school would be a little less than the conventional medical route, but it doesn't sound like that's the case. Like a little less abusive.
Yeah, no, it was really interesting when I went to go tour the university. They had a huge meditation
Oh,
tea
wow.
wing. And I was like, oh, this is wonderful. This is going to be wonderful. But I had graduated as a philosophy major in my
Oh,
undergrad. So
cool.
I had to go back and get I started at Math 95. I had to get all my pre-med, go back and do all the stuff that I had ignored as a philosophy major. And by the time I made it back, the beloved meditation tea wing had turned into a research center, which is wonderful, right? We
Sure.
want research, but it was
Both would be
not,
nice. Yeah.
yeah.
It was an example of what was to come.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely, absolutely, and it was very rigorous, and so it was kind of that proverbial straw that broke the camel's back, and I
Mhm.
was diagnosed with 2 autoimmune conditions, ulcerative colitis and Hashimoto thyroiditis and Lyme disease and multiple GI infections, and I was in the right place at the right time. I had so
Mhm.
many modalities and teachers and instructors and physicians helping me get well, and I was able to go back to school and see patients again and re-enter the program. For those of us that have had chronic diseases, getting back to that productive member of society, while it's wonderful to go from debilitated, not able to function to, being able to do the stuff you want to do, it still wasn't the picture of health. So I was looking for other ways to boost my health. And I was studying mitochondrial function. It was something that was really helpful with the patients we were seeing in clinical rounds. It was new, it was exciting. So I was really going down the research rabbit holes there. And the clinician I was working with, she was actually my physician and she was who I was doing clinical rounds underneath. She was pushing me to look at psychoneuroimmunology. And that's just a big word for where our emotions and thoughts impact our immune system and our biology overall. And I was a little resistant. I was like, don't you have a different botanical or maybe,
Yes.
an acupuncture treatment or even a pharmaceutical? Like I just didn't want to look at how my reactions and thoughts might be playing into my inflammatory state. And of course they were, right? And the marriage of the two, I was reading a research article from Martin Picard, and he was looking at how our meditative state, our thoughts and emotion can impact mitochondrial function. And I was like, wow, this is incredible. This opens up a whole new window, not to mention the research around light and our ability to capture light and use light. It was really something I hadn't learned in school. Everything was really, naturopathic school is kind of like allopathic medical school, except you're looking for botanical, herbal, lifestyle solutions rather than pharmaceuticals. And we sometimes use pharmaceuticals, but basically you're looking for an alternative. And it was really chemical, mechanical solutions. And so this idea that there's something more out there was just absolutely fascinated. And that's where I entered, and I've never really left the room of quantum
That's
biology.
incredible.
We were saying before we hit record just how many paradigm shifts you have kind of instigated in my life in a good way.
There's like a pre-Catherine and post-Catherine in Aaron's life.
Yeah.
And like a noticeable pre and post-Catherine.
So I'd love to talk about, and you already touched on this a bit, but kind of the paradigm shift or the new framework that we're working within now, understanding quantum and how it impacts biology, as opposed to this kind of what you call this Newtonian view of biology that we've been working with historically. So can you explain a little bit of what that means? And just the implications are vast, but I think it's helpful to have kind of that foundational understanding of the difference between the two.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And when I start to talk about quantum biology, people get really excited and they're like, oh, we throw everything else out. Like, no, we know classical physics still works. The Newtonian model is still at play in our body. But what the dominant model that's being taught in schools and being practiced in our doctor's offices is this idea that there's a randomness to our biology and life. There's this allosteric model where we have the key and receptor lock. The keys are bumping around in a cell, randomly colliding with things until they find their receptor, unlock, and then biological action happens. Now, we know that part where the key goes into the receptor and biological action happens is true, but it's the randomness that can't explain what's happening on a biological level, right? So if we were to look at any one of our trillions of cells, we would see that each one is performing hundreds and thousands of tasks each second. Some researchers estimate it in the millions, right? So
Wow.
it's just this astronomical amount of action happening in each cell, each second. And mathematically, that just can't be accounted for with randomness, with this collision sort of bumping into, I hope I find the receptor kind of model. And so that's where quantum biology comes into play. It allows for a much more efficient, much faster way for our biology to work. And it's really looking at quantum phenomenon in living systems. And so that means we're looking at quantum tunneling, we're looking at quantum coherence, entanglement, all of these things that play in our body. And it's really the study of the impact of these really small quantum objects, quantum particles, like the flow of electrons in our body, the flow of protons, the flow of photons of light or phonons from sound, and how they seem to initiate what we know to be that chemical mechanical model, right? That it isn't this randomness. It's this sea of sort of invisible action that is taking place and starting what we know to be true in our biology.
I love that description.
Do you have 6 more hours?
I know.
'Cause what?
I love it.
I love you so much right now.
I told you. I was getting so giddy. He's like, you really like this person.
Oh
I'm
my
like,
goodness.
just wait.
Well, I love you guys too.
Oh, thanks. We're in the same vibration. So speaking of all of those particles and the tiny quantum world that we're talking about, we own a bioenergetics company, and I'm often trying to explain to people there's a bit of a mental hurdle, right? When we hear words like frequency and energy, we start to feel like we're getting into the world of woo, which we are well accustomed with woo. It's just funny that bioenergetics is probably the least woo thing that we do. So talk to us a little bit about what those kind of words mean and how they can and do impact our biology.
Yeah, excellent. That's an excellent point, because the same thing is true when I start to speak. I'm talking with my book agent now, and he's like, no, it needs to be more woo.
Yeah.
And I'm like, it's quite woo. It allows for a lot of different things, but it's science, and that's incredible. And so when we're talking about frequency, when we're talking about vibration, we're actually literally talking about the vibration, the oscillation, the movement of a certain object, right? It can be a protein, it can be a cell membrane, it can be water. The example of a tuning fork, right? When we strike a tuning fork and another tuning fork of the same tune starts to resonate and sing, we don't say, oh, that's magic, that's woo.
Right.
Right. So that's really what is happening on a biological level. And there's something called the resonance recognition model, which really looks at how proteins, enzymes, really small things in our body might use resonance to communicate. And so it isn't this random bumping and hoping you'll find the right receptor. It is a energetic vibration that acts as a signal to attract other things of that same signal. And it's just an absolutely beautiful model that helps explain what's happening on a biological level. And we see this with, I'll say protein probably a lot in this podcast.
Beautiful.
But proteins, Bruce Lipton really talked about and taught us how, in our biology classes, we learned the nucleus of the cell is the brain, right? It has the DNA, it's the driver, it's the one calling all the shots. But what Lipton showed us was the proteins embedded in that bilipid membrane of a cell are really what's driving the action of the cell, because they have a piece outside of the cell extracellularly where they can be influenced by the environment around them, the extracellular environment, and they are going into the cell. So they really act sort of as this antenna or communication system where information from the outside of the cell can go inside and vice versa. And so when we're talking about action, proteins are really where it's at, right? And so proteins cover enzymes, which are huge biologically speaking. There would be no life without enzymes, right? So when I'm talking protein, it isn't your food kind of triangle of carbohydrates, fats, and proteins. It's this really little factories of work that create action in our body at a small level. And that's where the action happens. The function comes from this very small nano-sized protein embedded in a cell membrane. And so that's what we're talking about when we're talking about frequency, oscillation, resonance. We're talking about how vibration can change the function of that protein. Something that's commonly talked about in biology is that protein folding. When you have a change in the structure of the protein, then you have a change in biological action. And there's a lot of research out there showing that change in function can be initiated by resonance. And it's a much more in-depth explanation than just, oh, well, it's randomness. It sort of reminds me of, well, 97% of our DNA is just junk DNA. Like, we don't know what it does, so it's junk.
Right.
It's like, well, maybe
Beg to differ
not.
now.
Yes, it's funny that we are tempted to keep thinking over and over again that nature kind of makes mistakes in some way. There's just extra, but it's just that we don't really know yet. And I think it was you maybe that I heard talking about, even in relation to the electron transport chain. And then we have water as like this waste product. And now we're learning that it's not a waste product. Like, actually, that's like the jewel there is this kind of structured water that is a little kind of highway for energy to be transmitted. But actually, I think this is a good time to talk about structured water, if that's okay, because I think it's a very foundational part for people to understand what it is in the body and how it impacts our biology as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And so when we're talking about frequency, we can be talking about the frequency of light, the frequency of sound, any kind of frequency information, oscillatory, vibratory information. And I'm going to answer your question. It just sounds like I'm not.
Oh, please keep going. Yeah.
That vibratory frequency information can act on crystalline structures. And what do we mean by crystalline structures? We mean that, like a quartz crystal, the molecules in the crystal are aligned in a certain direction. And with a liquid crystal, you can put some kind of force on that, whether it's a mechanical pressure, whether it's light, whether it's sound. Oh, they just what would you say, observed sound waves in a crystal, in a diamond. It's absolutely, it's
Oh, that's
so,
incredible.
I know, it's so
Oh, that's
exciting.
so exciting.
It's so cool. And so that crystalline nature allows that structure to uniformly accept that energy impulse.
Mm.
And when you're talking about a liquid crystal, not only can it accept that energy impulse, it can align and orient in a different way. It can kind of change. And what we're doing now, talking on our computer screen
Yep.
or watching our TVs or our smartphones, those are being powered by liquid crystalline technology,
Yeah.
where light hits those liquid crystals and they align in a certain way and create this beautiful image. The same thing seems to be happening in our body with our liquid crystalline surfaces in the body, which would be our cell membranes, our DNA, our fascia, and our fascia is connecting to every single structure in the body. And what's lining these things is also liquid crystalline in nature. And this structured water that you brought up is what's lining those things.
Mm.
And this was theorized by some really incredible researchers, Nobel laureate Albert St. Georgi and Gilbert Ling and Emilio Del Gice. But it wasn't until the early 2000s with Gerald Pollack and his team out of the University of Washington, they actually identified this crystalline structured water. And they were looking at Naphion. And Naphion is a synthetic a hydrophilic surface. And by hydrophilic, that means water loving. So it doesn't repel water. It allows for that water to coalesce and sort of bond onto that outside edge. And he found that as one sheet of this crystalline water forms against a hydrophilic surface, it acts as a template for more sheets to form. And what was creating more sheets of this structured water to form? Infrared energy. And I think it's a good time to say that the sun is the biggest source of infrared energy on our planet. We also create infrared energy inside of ourselves and our fascia and our mitochondria. But as that structured water forms and builds with infrared energy, it is creating a negative charge. And as that forms directly outside of that structured water zone or that crystalline water zone, is a positive proton wire or proton rich zone, it's being called in the research. Hydrogen is kicked out and it forms this separation of charge between the negatively charged structured water and the positively charged proton zone. And Pollack showed by putting an electrode in the negatively charged zone and one in the positively charged zone, that separation of charge, just like a battery that we would use, was enough to light an LED light bulb.
Crazy. So wild.
It's so cool.
Yeah.
I know. When I learned that, my mind just exploded.
Mine just exploded.
There's so many implications here too. It's just yeah, it's hard to even wrap your head around it.
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. And so they're looking at Naphion. And so it's okay, cool. This could apply to so many different things. We could use it for technology. It was this exclusion zone. We could use it for desalination, all these different things. But then he started researching hydrophilic surfaces in living structures, in plants, in collagen, right? That fascial network that I just mentioned that connects to every structure in the body. And he found the same thing. Those hydrophilic surfaces within us start to build that structured water zone and that positively charged zone, creating what I call the water battery within us. And so you have a completely new mode of energy production and communication in the body via this crystalline structured water. It's just mind blowing.
So insane.
It is. And so you mentioned a couple things with sunlight, but there are several ways that we can kind of assist our body in structuring the water. Is that right?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, from, oh geez, so many different ways, right? So
Yeah.
getting sunlight is a major one because it's a big source of infrared energy, and we want it to be safe sun, right? So if we're getting sun damage, we're actually damaging that collagen network that I just talked about. And that inhibits our ability to create structured water in that zone, to communicate as this highway within the body, right? So we're talking about safe sun exposure. And that looks like, I know you guys didn't ask about this, but I'll just
Please
quickly
keep
say.
going. Yeah. There's no apologies ever.
Yeah.
You can just keep talking. We're just going to just be stoked. Yeah.
I just want to let people know that we have this idea. I'm here in the Pacific Northwest, and it is cloudy and gray and probably will be till March.
Mhm.
You can tell by looking at me, I'm not the dark skin, out in the sun all the time person. So, what I do to get safe sun is I start by getting that springtime sun exposure,
Mhm.
getting that AM sun exposure where there's way less chance of me getting skin damage, but I can build up that
Mhm.
ability to be in the sun. And so when we're talking about getting sunlight and getting exposure to sun and infrared energy, I'm not talking about going to the beach at high noon and getting a sunburn, right? That's going to be detrimental to what we're talking about. I'm talking about fostering that relationship with the sun. And when it does go behind these gray clouds, I keep looking out the windows here, when it does disappear for late fall through early spring, what we do is we get infrared energy in other ways. Saunas are a great way. I don't have a sauna, so I create a little sauna in my bathroom. I will turn on
Awesome.
the shower for 30 seconds, really hot, and get it steamy. And then we're on a well too, so I have to be really conscious of my water consumption. So I will fill the tub up with this much water,
Mhm.
this much. It is not one of those like Calgon, take me away,
Soaker tubs,
luxurious.
yeah.
Yeah, it's not. But I've got my water heater turned up so that I can
Mhm.
make it warm enough. And I flip around actually in there, so I'm laying normal, and then I flip on my belly and on my
Mhm.
elbows so that I'm getting that infrared energy from the warm water. And the air in the bathroom is warm. Sometimes if it's really cold, I'll put a towel underneath the crack in the door so there's no escaping of the warm air or introduction of cooler air. And that's enough to get a good sweat going. I can
Mhm.
really increase my body temperature just with that introduction of infrared energy. Adding a warm beverage, a warm tea, we kind of call it soup and stew season over
Yep.
here. We have a lot of warm food, warm beverages, warming spices to increase that infrared energy. Movement is a
Mhm.
great one. Sitting fireside is something that we evolved with over millennia as humans to increase that infrared energy in the winter time, right? So there are a lot of ways to increase our infrared energy that aren't these amazing, really expensive saunas, right?
Exactly.
I'm not against them. If you
Yeah.
guys want to give me one, but
Noted.
it's
Christmas is coming.
Yeah, Christmas is coming. Also, Josh, did you notice that she said soup, babe?
I did.
Soup. Josh is anti-soup, and I'm very pro-soup in the
On our
winter, but
podcast, we may have had a brief moment where before Rudy and bioenergetics and before I got sick, by trade, I'm what's called a UX designer, user experience designer. So I kind of
Mm.
filter life through how good user experiences can be. And soup for me just isn't one of those with a beard and you're slurping. And so
but
everyone has now given me a hard time because the world knows that soup isn't my number one source
but
of food.
Dr. Catherine
But
says so.
now I
Yes.
love it. So there we go. A along all of these concepts, the science is incredibly complex. Even just in the past 20 minutes, that's been proven. But a lot of the applications are incredibly practical. Erin and I talk a lot with our clients. Most clients that come to Rudy, we typically are seeing them at rock bottom. They're really sick. And oftentimes the foundation isn't set. And a lot of the complex science that offers practical applications or solutions, like what we're talking about, isn't set yet. And so when we talk to them about those, it almost feels too easy and it makes it feel like it wouldn't work. Can you talk to us a little bit about how you approach the conversation in that way of not necessarily proving that it would work, but helping people receive it on a more logical level?
Yeah, absolutely. So when I'm speaking with people, I take a lot of time in those first few visits to really just inundate them with the science
Mm.
so that they're just like, whoa, this is complex. This is research. This is a lot, right? And so I'm, like I said, inundating them with the science, with the research, with the concept. But the takeaway that I'm asking them to do is, align with the rhythm of the sun, get
Yeah.
out in nature, get some grounding, get some seasonal input, depending on whatever the season is, right? And so the checklist that I'm giving them, so to speak, or the prescription is not fancy, right? So I have to do my job educating them on the sort of fancy research and the complexity of the research and how our biology works. So I try to wow them
Yeah.
with, look at how amazing this is, and look at how complex this is, and what a rich fabric of communication and interactions are happening in our body. And here's how you need to start dialing it in. And I'm not adverse to supplements at all. That's something that I use as well. And when some of the people that I've seen, they're really sick.
Yeah.
Like myself in school, if I hadn't been given steroids for that little
Mhm.
bit, I don't know if I would have recovered. Steroids long term are not a good solution, but to put a pause on the biology, that sort of hysterical positive feedback loop that happens with inflammation, it can be really helpful.
Yeah.
I'm talking really short term, right? But I'm not opposed to whatever tool is going to work, but the foundation are really these relationships. And that's what I see with my patients. I give them a lot of information, a lot of science, try to wow them into this understanding of how our body works. I also share how my healing worked so that they understand, like, I have some understanding of this. I understand the frustration of not feeling well for years, and not having doctors listen and all of this, right? So I try to hold space for them while wowing them with
Yeah.
this research. And then, what I see happen is the same thing that was happening to me as I learned this information like 20 years ago, this checklist, right? Okay, I got to get out in the sun, and
Mhm.
okay, I got to ground, and
Yep.
this sort of like chore list, right? But what happened was it opened up this door of relationship with the world around me. So the rising of the sun now is something that gives me a sense of gratitude. It's a
Yeah.
relationship. I'm
Yeah.
happy to see her. I
Yes.
Yes,
You're
I
speaking my
feel
Yeah,
language.
big
Yeah.
time.
I'm happy to see her. I feel a sense of belonging and safety
Right.
because she's there,
Mm.
and the rhythm, or maybe she's a he, but whatever,
There's no
whatever.
duality in this universe, so it could be whatever
Yeah,
you want it to be.
I think
yeah.
technically sun is ascribed to the masculine and moon
I
is the
know.
It could
feminine,
be
but
whatever you want.
yeah.
Yeah.
I know it is ascribed that way, but
Let it be a she for you.
Yes.
but I sometimes change it around. But
It's
Yeah.
great.
anyway, that relationship with that
Mhm.
sun gives me a sense of safety. Same with my relationship with the ground and the earth,
Mm.
right?
Mhm.
Being able, wherever I'm at, to go find a patch of dirt or soil or grass or rocks or sand and find a sense of belonging, like an embrace, right? Because
Mhm.
so many, I really have never, ever not seen this in someone that was chronically ill.
Yep,
Yeah.
exactly.
100%.
Yeah, is that lack of safety, right?
Mhm.
You're in that sympathetic fight or flight, you're not, or dissociative, a next step
Yep.
back. There's no sense of safety or belonging. And in this modern day life, there's so many of us living in unsafe relationships or families or workplaces or societies. You look at what's happening now on a global level,
Yeah.
it really doesn't make us feel safe.
Mhm.
Yeah.
And that's a huge obstacle to healing and health, and being able to get that sense of safety and belonging in the natural world, in the rhythm of the sun, in the rising of the moon, in a
Mhm.
patch of grass or the trunk of a tree. It's just absolutely life-changing, I would say.
Yeah.
You are speaking.
Yes, it's because
Ooh.
I've listened to every
Oh
podcast
my
she's ever
goodness.
made, so we speak like this in our
Oh my goodness. We are hugging trees and sitting on the ground, and you just romanticized it in the best way possible. Yeah.
I know. I love that concept of the relationship too, because like you said, the lack of safety in anyone with chronic illness, whether that contributed to the chronic illness or it cropped up because of the chronic illness, probably both, but
Yeah.
it's got to be addressed because I'm sure you're familiar with the cell danger response and this
Yep.
concept of the mitochondria sensing essentially safety within
Yeah.
the body. And so if it doesn't, we get stuck in that danger response and our bodies can't go beyond that to heal. But also looking from a relationship perspective, because I think not every client I work with, but I would say maybe 70, 80% or so have a lot of kind of perfectionistic tendencies to them. I don't know if I think it's a component as well that leads people to become burned out and sick, but to kind of nix that checklist in their head about all the things they got to do to heal. Because let's be honest, the wellness world is overwhelming. There are so many tools and modalities, and we're one. I get it. We're another somebody advertising to people we want to help you heal. It comes from a very authentic place, but there's so many out there that kind of taking away the checklist approach and more so leaning into this relationship to foster safety within and in communication with the environment. I think it's just so beautiful and needed.
Yeah, absolutely. And the tools are wonderful, right?
Mhm.
There's wonderful tools out there. That's not to say that negate that or
Right.
downplay that, but that foundational relationship that we have with the world around us, that is the safety signal, right?
Yep.
That's what we evolved with over millennia,
Yeah.
Mhm.
to tell our body it's safe. One of my favorite studies, and this is a weird thing to get so excited about, but it's so exciting to me.
I
They
love
did
it.
a study with infants, and they were looking at the microbiome and the change that happens with trauma. And
Mm.
so in adults, they had done this a lot, right? And you can see this predictable shift in the gut microbiome after trauma. And they
Mhm.
looked at babies in the NICU that had to be separated from their mothers because of medical necessity. They were not separating them to do
Mm.
this study. And they took stool samples to look at their gut microbiome. And they saw that predictable shift in the gut microbiome that happens with trauma. And they reproduced this in an animal model, and they gave omega 3s. And
Wow.
they put that in the breast milk that was being given. And the shift
Hmm.
in the microbiome went back to a normal, non traumatized gut microbiome. They were
Wow.
not back with their mothers. They were
Mhm.
probably, I would say, almost definitely still feeling traumatized, right?
Mm.
Like
Yeah.
that happened while they were still separated. It wasn't like the fish oils were like, oh,
Hmm.
now you're safe. And they were happy little babies and
Yeah.
didn't need their moms anymore. No, they were probably still experiencing, I would say, that trauma. But that introduction of something that we have evolved with again over millennia, we grew up to speak
Mm.
as humanity on waterways, eating
Right.
seafoods, eating algae, eating sea plants, eating things that contain omega 3 fatty acids. And so when that was introduced into the diet, it was like, oh, the safety signal. And that kind of, to me, highlighted the idea that we've really walked away from so many of our safety signals, from our light environment, our sound environment, our nutritional environment, our communal environment, being able to sit around and talk story around a fire and drum and sing and all of those things we've really walked away from because modern life doesn't provide as much space for that. It doesn't, that isn't the encouragement of modern life. And so when you look at it that way, you see that we're just inundated with these danger signals of modern life. And if we can start to put back some of those safety signals, then that sense of safety, that cell danger response you mentioned before, that state of homeostasis is much closer, and healing and health is much closer as well.
That's beautiful. And I also just love how all these concepts under the umbrella of quantum biology, it's like the research is new and recent, but it's always pointing us back to what the ancient people and what shamans have been telling us for millennia. It's almost like kind of laughable that why didn't we know? We did know this, actually. We've just forgotten. Especially, I just love how people like you to bring that sense of humility to these conversations, because I've heard other conversations of people regurgitating this new research as if they've found the new right way, or they have ego gets kind of tied into it all. But it's, man, the shamans and the ancient people have been telling us forever, and here we are, just because we have now science behind it. We're on board.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Every year I do a summit, a free summit for people to learn more about quantum biology. And I have researchers and scientists, but I also really try to balance it with indigenous healers, shamans, people that have been carrying this tradition forever, so that we remember this isn't just the latest and greatest thing that we're seeing under a microscope. This was the product of indigenous wisdom forever. And I try to be really mindful of that, because how ridiculous is it of me to say I've discovered that being in nature or having community drumming by the fire, it's just like,
Imagine.
So yeah,
incredible.
and that's something that's exciting to me when you look at science, right? Because we look at the scientific revolution, and with that, they discarded all of the faith-based, and really at that time it was Christianity, right? They discarded that faith-based sort of mechanism of action, so to speak. And they discarded that ancient indigenous knowing, right? If you didn't see it under a microscope, it didn't exist, or it wasn't true. That was the truth. Like, we're the humans, we're at the top of the pyramid. We're supposed to go out and extract the truth from the world around us. And to have science now coming full circle back to an appreciation and a validation of what those peoples were always saying is really exciting to me. I shared something on social media, and it was this new technique they were using to see quantum entanglement in real time. So usually it takes a while to see quantum entanglement. It can take days or weeks, right? When you're measuring it in a lab. And these people were looking at it through new technology, able to see it within seconds or minutes, which is just mind-blowing.
Crazy.
Yeah.
So crazy. And then they put that technology and they put that phenomenon of entanglement through a filter of a yin yang. And a lot of people looked at the research and they were like, oh, that's what a quantum entanglement looks like. It looks like a yin yang. No, it was a total filter that they used to produce that image. But the exciting thing is, not only are we able to see that at such fast time, in real time, but these quantum physicists decided to use a yin-yang
Yeah.
That's
symbol.
exactly.
I love it.
Incredible.
Because they get it. I feel like the people who start to understand the interconnectedness and all the, just whatever you want to call them, synchronicities, it's like we're all the same thing somehow. We're all fractals of the same thing. As soon as they get it, whether or not they're researchers or shaman or whoever, it does kind of lend itself to, I don't know, being more open to the mystic parts of life, right? Like the mysticism and the wonder, rather than trying to explain every little thing.
Yeah. And when we talk about like coherence or the observer effect, it really begs the question, are we meant to know it all, or are we
Yeah.
supposed to have an appreciation for it, right?
Hmm.
And I think you can guess where I
Yeah.
land.
No
I
need to
think
say it.
yeah, an appreciation is well overdue, but my hubris isn't as high to expect that we'll get it all, right?
Yeah.
I'm going to be thinking about that for a while. You said, are we meant to know it all or are we meant to appreciate it all? Yeah. I love that.
That's a good one for you.
I know. I tend to really want to know it all, Dr. Catherine.
Me too. Oh, me too. Someone the other day was saying we were talking about phones and screen time, and they spend a lot of time on social media, and I was like, I was telling them how I get in and out of social media,
Yeah.
right? Like I've got my checklist, I'm in and out, I do my thing,
Mm.
and they were like, "What? When you do scroll, what do you do?" I'm like, "I am researching. I
Yeah.
am going down research rabbit holes. It's exciting. I want to
Yeah.
know it all, but I don't think I will. Just want to know what's out there."
Yeah,
That's
exactly.
Erin. Zoe, our daughter, and Erin will like have headphones in listening to some quantum physics podcast about
The Song of the Cell, it's like a 16-hour audiobook. That's what I'm currently working through. It's really
and
That's
dense, but
Zoe now
beautiful.
will be like, mom's in her other universe, like learning about something completely out of this world.
Oh, that's beautiful. I love that one.
Yeah. Okay. So this question's slightly selfish, partially because of my story. I'm hoping that listeners resonate with this because they're going through similar, at least, experiences that I've had. When I was completely bedridden and then now to where I am today, a lot of what changed the course of my healing was the idea of meditations and affirmations, which then led into spirituality in a space that I didn't even really know existed. That then turned into starting to have experiences with nature or feeling energies, or I felt something as soon as you came on. And I could feel our vibrations. I can sense that and not necessarily understand it, but like you're saying, very much appreciate experiencing all of that is new and exciting, but also slightly terrifying. I'd be curious, though, if there are words for it in the quantum space with the research that you do and just the perspective that you have on how those thoughts and beliefs inform our biology.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. When we're talking about thoughts and beliefs, I mean, we can take it from a bunch of different levels. So, like psychoneuroimmunology is looking at a bunch of different things. It's looking at chemical release, right? So, if I have a thought of gratitude or love, that will release certain neurotransmitters and chemicals in the body. And that has like this ripple effect. We can take it from a quantum coherence perspective where
Mm.
those thoughts and emotions can cohere different things. And Heart Math Institute is
Yeah.
really
Oh, yeah.
yeah, right. They're the
Yep.
love them.
Big
leader of this.
fans.
Yeah, same here. Same
Yeah.
here. I love what they're doing, and they're looking at how the heart and the brain can cohere. And coherence is really the idea that two or more things are resonating at the same level, the same frequency. They're communicating seamlessly, working together seamlessly.
Mm.
And the opposite of that, when your heart and your brain are in coherence, you're innervated in that frontal lobe. You're thinking calm, rationally, making decisions. And that coherence ripples out to other systems. And this is something that the opposite also holds true.
Mm.
So our brain and our heart are neurologically connected, mostly through that vagus nerve. And when we are in a lack of coherence or in an incoherent state, we are innervating that hindbrain, the amygdalas, that fight or flight fear response. And that has a different ripple effect on our organs and our systems in the body. And so the coherence of different thoughts and emotions have a impact on our electromagnetic field. And so when you're talking about quantum biology and the biofield, a lot of people take the biofield to mean that electromagnetic field, that electromagnetic frequency, and how there can be communication and entrainment and communication between two different fields, like the head and the heart, or like our coherence with someone else's magnetic field or electromagnetic field. Now, I think you can take it to an even finer level if you talk about how thoughts create inelastic collisions of molecules in the neurons. And that creates a frequency of its own that can travel throughout the body. And remember, we talked about proteins in cell membranes, enzymes, all of these things being able to resonate and communicate via vibration. So I think there's all kinds of different ways we could look at it. And I think that there's something that we can't measure. I think that biofield science is often talked about the electromagnetic field or frequency, but it's also something more. It can't just be boiled down to that. And that's where we get into what is it, right? Is it
Yes.
that 0 point field? Is it? That's a really fun conversation because yeah,
It's most of our conversations recently.
Yes.
Oh, you guys are so fun.
For everyone listening, welcome to our dinner conversations.
Yeah. Yes. If you would have asked us 10 years ago if we'd be talking about this stuff, I probably would have laughed at you. But, it's fun, this wild world of mystery and quantum and yeah. So on the topic of coherence versus chaos, I love this topic. I think you just recently had a summit on this, didn't you? Coherence? Or maybe you were a part of it maybe.
I was a part of one that was put on by Dr. Roland McCready of the Heart Math Institute
cool.
and Dr. Christine Schaffner. Yeah, it was amazing.
Yeah, I just think it's a very important topic at the present moment in time and history. And we can talk about it from a personal perspective. Like I can generate coherence within my body to benefit my health and my biology. But I think in a lot of ways throughout the cosmos, we see like the macro and the micro kind of mirroring one another, if that makes sense. So what's happening in here happens throughout the world, right? And the cosmos even. And I probably because I'm listening to this Song of the Cell book, and he was talking about one of the scientists, or I think in the 1800s, Dr. Virchow, but how and his research in the cell, and he saw how essentially the health of the cell kind of dictated the health of the body to some degree, and he was seeing this mimicked in society too, like the health of the individual citizen or all the members of a society, their health impacts the health of the whole, the society, the culture. And so it really pushed him to be kind of a proponent of social change and justice. And he kind of went against the rhetoric of the time. And so I'm just curious to hear how coherence applies kind of on a grander scale, just in light of what's happening in the world right now. It like you said, it's hard to feel safe in the world. It's hard to feel like we matter or can make a difference right now in the world. So how do you look at that?
Yeah, absolutely. I would say that I like to always start with the research because it can kind of get people on board with the ideas, right? And so we've talked about that idea of heart coherence and having that heart and brain be in a coherent state and how that affects our biology. What we didn't talk about is that state of coherence can entrain with other people. So you can have group coherence, right? And that's something that the Heart Math Institute has also researched to a great degree. And there's a research out there showing that when you have a coherent group, it can affect the community at large, right? And especially now, I think that maybe 5-6 years ago, I did a lot of activism. I did a lot of organizing rallies and marches and protests. And that is one avenue of action. But the more I did that, realized the more I was just doing that one set of action, that one linear progression of movement. And it didn't really speak to coherence, right? And so when we're talking about group coherence and the idea that there was research out there showing that when you took a group of seasoned meditation practitioners, and they did this in New York when the rates of crime were really high, and they took this group of seasoned practitioners and had them meditate, and they tried to get rid of all the confounding factors that would be in something like that would influence violent crimes, right?
Mm.
Heat, so many different things, right?
Yeah.
Mhm.
And what they found was this strong correlation between a decrease in those violent crimes
Hmm.
when those practitioners were meditating. And
That's
they
crazy.
did
Oh,
this.
that makes me so giddy.
I know.
I
That's
know, right?
incredible.
It's so incredible. And they did this in the Middle East during war.
Hmm.
And they saw the same thing, the same correlation with a decrease in violent wartime activity when at the same time as these seasoned practitioners were meditating. And then they added more people to the
Oh.
group, and they saw a bigger
Oh.
decrease in those violent
Wow, I have
crimes.
so many goosebumps.
I
Yeah.
know, right? I
Why are we
know,
not, I don't know, filling the tanks with meditators? Like,
right?
that's what we need? Oh my gosh,
I
that's
I
crazy.
feel along your points, and this I'm not meaning to derail, but Joe Dispenza has we call him Daddy Joe in our household. So I
Good
almost
old
just
Daddy
said
Joe.
Daddy Joe and realized that you wouldn't have known what I was talking about. But good old Daddy Joe has so much research about when people come together on a measurable scale, we're able to now see the impact that has. And so
That's
what you're
crazy.
saying just reconfirms that
Mhm.
the impact that has. Like I've done meditations in groups and I go places. I will
Mhm.
be like in a completely different space. And yeah, it's why well, it was unexplainable to me. I would just be like, wow, the energy here is crazy.
Mhm.
Being able to understand the power that's within, that then together, how much that amplifies,
Yeah.
we can make really huge impacts. And
Yeah.
not only in the healing space, although we're talking about healing in general, but this can trickle down generations.
Mhm.
And I think
Yes.
that's a really important conversation that we need to continue to have.
Yeah.
Absolutely. I couldn't agree more, because when we start to work on that internal coherence, it ripples out to our community, but it
Yeah.
ripples down
Hmm.
to our offspring. I think we're at like 21 generations now, right? Where our
Crazy.
stress responses can be epigenetically transferred.
Mhm.
Yeah.
When we're talking about ways to affect a global situation that we are thousands of miles from,
Mm.
the idea, and I'm not saying that taking action is wrong at
Right.
all. What I'm saying is if we can take that action in a state of coherence, then not
Yes.
only are we doing something proactive with a measurable result. I called my congressperson, or
Mhm.
I did this thing,
Yeah.
but we are creating a state of peace that will make our resilience higher, both right
Yes.
now and in the future and in future generations. So these changes that we want to see in the world around us aren't this trying to push a boulder up a mountain, right?
Yeah.
Mhm.
My ability to stop something right now on the global front is quite low. I just don't have that power. I can take
Mm.
action, and I should. I can do things, but my ability to press the stop button
Hmm.
doesn't really exist, right?
Yeah.
So for me to take action in a state of coherence, and it doesn't
Mhm.
mean that I can't feel angry. It doesn't
Right.
mean that I can't feel sorrow and the devastation of loss. It means that I'm not working from right there. I'm not
Right.
drawing my
Yeah.
energy from that. I am experiencing that emotion and keeping that coherence so that I don't have to take such a hit, right? I
Mm.
talked a little bit about how I was what you would call an activist before, and
Mhm.
it was so draining.
I bet.
And it was really not good for my health. And my kids would come with me. And if we had done it from a state of coherence, if we had
Hmm.
done this with that in mind, which was not what everyone else had in mind, it would have been a much different outcome. And I think that if we can keep that idea of working in coherence, and that the energy patterns in our body truly matter, and if we want to make a difference in the world, not only do we need to have that coherence, because like we just talked about, it does ripple out, but also it breeds a resilience. And over the
Yeah.
last few months, I've seen such an uptick in aggression in
Yeah.
my interactions, right? People very aggressive about heart coherence, right? Just
Yeah.
I I just couldn't I can't really explain it except to say that there is this sort of global coherence. And what I notice is when I can be in that state of coherence and talk with them, and most of this is online, right? So it's keyboard talking. But if I can take that coherence and bring it to the conversation, the whole dynamic changes, right?
Yeah.
These people that used to be so angry with me now, just last week, are sending heart emojis and so glad we're on the same
Wow.
page. And it's like, um, it's just such a wonderful thing to see. And it doesn't mean that we need to be on the same page. It means that we can have differences of opinion. We can have very strong emotions. But when we have a state of coherence, when we have that frequency to be able to be in a coherent conversation, like this is very coherent, right? Like I'm listening to you guys, you listen to me, we're thinking of things, we're
Yeah.
excited, anticipating. It's this flow. And we've been in other conversations, right? Where you kind of leave saying, I didn't even really get my point across because no
Sure.
one would let me, right? It was
Sure.
Yeah.
totally incoherent. When we bring that coherence, it doesn't mean that we leave everything aside. It doesn't mean everything's love and light. We can
Yeah.
have those big feelings and emotions and differences of agreement, but the conversations look completely different. The outcome is completely different. And I think that's also the power of coherence.
Oh
I
my
just
goodness. I mean, I know Erin's a fangirl. I know that you're her hero. I mean, I follow you and I keep
Mm.
track of you, but I didn't know how incredible you were.
I
This,
did.
yeah. Holy cannoli.
So good. I think these conversations are just so important to be
I
having. I'm
want to
really
have dinner with you.
I know.
Yeah.
Can we come to
Yeah.
Oregon?
I'm going to come cook you dinner.
Yes.
Yeah, absolutely. Maybe I'll make you some soup.
I will happily drink it with you.
I'm just
I
kidding.
love it.
um,
Love it.
so as we close with all of our guests, we ask not I was going to say a simple question. It can sometimes not be a simple question, but we'd love to hear what freedom looks like to you in any way. It could be for you personally or what you're working on, but we'd love to hear what freedom is to you.
I think freedom, wow, I think I'll bring it back to this idea of coherence and in a wave, right? So as a collective, they're separate molecules of water in that wave, right? But they're completing this collective action together. So for me, freedom doesn't mean that I'm completely separate and able to do what I want. It means that I can maintain my individuality, my sense of self. I can have my own beliefs. I can have my own goals, my own missions, my own trajectory. But I can also do that while maintaining a part of the bigger collective, whether that's the world around me, whether that's my community. If you had asked me 20 years ago or 25 years ago, that young Catherine would be like, freedom is like anarchy and it's,
Yes.
it's me against the world type of
Yeah.
thing. And
Yeah.
now I think that freedom to me means that I'm able to be myself, make my own decisions, have that freedom, but have that freedom within a bigger collective. And I think that if we moved towards a freedom like that, our world would look a lot different. And
Yeah.
to me, that's really the definition of freedom that I would like to see more
Yep.
of.
That's incredible.
Beautiful. So beautiful. Thank you so much for joining us and for sharing all of your wisdom and knowledge and coherence. We're deeply grateful for you.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for having me on. It's just been a pleasure. It's been good medicine, right? Talking with you guys, like a good
Likewise.
coherent.
Same.
A good pot of soup.
A good coherent pot of stew.
All right, guys, you
Love
can
it.
win on this one.
Oh, goodness. Well, I hope you have a beautiful weekend. And yeah, hopefully we'll get to have more conversations down the road.
Yeah, absolutely. I thank you so much for having me on, and I look forward to part 2.
Cool.
Awesome.
You're the best.
Well, thanks for listening, guys.
Thanks, everybody.
Stay open.
Stay open.
Bye.
Bye.